This is TWiT.
So I think last week we talked about the MSI 2080. This is now 2080 Ti from ASUS. You know, higher clocks out of the gate. It's a large card. You can see by looking at the picture how much taller it is than the retention bracket.
The
it is
beast
wider
comes
than
to mind.
Yeah, they call it a 2.7 slot design, which gives them 20% better heat dissipation area or 20% more heat dissipation area. I'm assuming that's compared to the Founders Edition, the reference design. It's very similar to the style we saw with Strix cards previously. Triple fan design. You've kind of got the RGB light strips that kind of surround each of the fan sections. You've got a BIOS button on the back. You've got all the same features that you would be used to there. It does do things a little bit differently in that you have 2 DisplayPort and 2 HDMI plus the virtual link connection there. I mean, geez, even these graphics cards have USB Type-C on a Microsoft. Come on. But the reference designs have 3 DisplayPort and 1 HDMI. ASUS goes the direction of 2 HDMI. It does do 2 8-pin power connectors instead of an 8 and a 6. And it does very well. I mean, it's a little bit faster out of the box in its performance mode. The difference between performance mode and quiet mode is really not dramatic in our testing, but Ken has a handful of benchmarks in there showing it faster than the 2080 Ti Founders Edition. In terms of thermals, that's where you see sound and thermals. You see more of an advantage, right? 33.9. That's pretty darn low for a graphics card running at full tilt in Unigine heaven there. And then in terms of clock speeds, you can see. Let's see, what did we get on the overclock? We were able to do 140 megahertz offset. The max voltage offset that they allow, 125% power target, and able to be stable just over 2 gigahertz. Now, what you might recognize here is that, as it turns out, it's not really any different than the Founders Edition overclock of the 2080 Ti. And in fact, if you look at it, it's literally identical. Shows us that in reality, like the board design, the cooler design, while it will keep the temperature of the GPU down, it doesn't really affect the overall performance because the Founders Edition is now a dual axial fan as opposed to a blower style, and the voltage controls, power controls that NVIDIA has in its firmware and on their GPUs are substantial still, right? They're not allowing the board vendors to really do a lot of customizations, which means it's harder for them to differentiate even with their high-end products. Right. From EVGA, from MSI, from ASUS, or whoever. But you can see, if you look at the Unigine graph there, just underneath the one we just had up, yeah, that one there. So there is a pretty big temperature difference, right? If you look at the orange line, that's the Founders Edition at its peak. It hits just like 79C or so after 5-10 minutes worth of gaming, whereas the ASUS card stays around 67 degrees Celsius. So a pretty substantial difference there. The problem is we can't turn that into performance yet. I'm sure we'll see hardware mods and stuff for this, but for the average person that doesn't want to get a soldering iron out on their $1,200 product, that part is a little disappointing. But overall, I think this card is only $50 more than the Founders Edition, right? So it's MSRP is $1,249, which is really high. But again, the Founders Edition is $1,199, and this is a cooler that is a step above what the Founders Edition cooler can do. It does that, and obviously at the expense of size. It is 2.7 slot. It is significantly taller. So there are some trade-offs for it. But in terms of a retail product, customized design, $50 extra is not really outside the realm of what we're used to seeing. In fact, it's actually pretty nominal. We'll have to see when they become available and what their prices are at actual, Amazon and Newegg listings. But for now, based on the MSRP that ASUS expects them to see, that's pretty good.
It's interesting. I'm still kind of impressed when you just look at some of the numbers between the the 2080 Ti and the 2080, where you're looking at some of the best benchmarks, as much as a 40%, I think, bump in performance.
Yeah.
You know, obviously, I think I would have liked to have seen that from the 2080, but you know,
sure.
But I mean, I would say, like, where is it? Yeah, I mean, I think you're looking at like 37, 38% dashes of the Singularity. GTA 5 not as impressive, maybe. It's still about 25%. But if you're going to spend all of the money on a 2080 or 20 series card, I should say, if you're going to spend all the money on 20 series card and you're going to run 4K gaming, I almost feel like you should just break down and find the extra $400 to buy a 2080 Ti if you can. That said, I think the vast majority of humanity should just buy a 1080 or a 1080 Ti now while they're so cheap, and wait to see what happens with RTX games over the next 6 or 8 months. But that may be an unreasonable thing to say given the cost of the cards.
Yeah.
I don't know. Huh. Seems just I don't know. It's I don't want to say it's a bad time to be buying a GPU, but it would be frustrating to spend, you know, $800 or $1,200. Well, I guess, you know, $700 or $800 on a you know, 10 series GPU, and then find there's a bunch of great RTX games next year. But I may be. I just don't see it happening. Is that wrong of me? Should we just wait to see what AMD comes out with? Will AMD reveal ray tracing at CES 2019? Ryan Shrout will be there in the front row, staring up.
Close enough.
Wonder. Yeah, he'll be in the first 5 rows probably. I don't know. I wish the price deltas between the 10 series and 20 series cards weren't so high. That's all I'm going to say.